The hook asterisk the stars stretched wide across the black sea of space, endless, silent, and cold. A single cargo ship moved slowly through the void, its massive engines humming like the heartbeat of a giant. The hauler was old, patched together with years of repairs, yet it still held strong. Inside sat the trucker. His name was not important, not to him, not anymore. To the galaxy, he was just another face, another tired man hauling goods from one world to another. He did not chase fame. He did not search for wealth. All he wanted was quiet roads among the stars. He lived by one simple rule: never ask for anything, not money, not thanks, not recognition. It was this rule that made him different. Many spacers chased glory or fortune. Many demanded pay for every small deed, but not him. He had seen too much, lost too much. Now he only wanted the silence of the road and the weight of his own thoughts. His cargo today was simple steel, food packs, and machine parts bound for a mining station. Nothing special. The hum of the ship was steady, and the stars outside blurred as the ship pushed forward. It should have been another quiet run. It's just him and the long road. But then the silence broke. A sharp beeping echoed from his console. His eyes flicked to the radar. A signal. Weak. Almost gone. He frowned. Distress signals in deep space were never a good thing. They could be genuine, or they could be traps. Pirates sometimes sent false signals, waiting for kind souls to wander. Close, then striking without mercy. Most truckers knew better. Most ignored the signals, telling themselves, "It's not my problem." But his hands did not move to shut it off. His fingers hovered, then tapped the console. The signal came again, faint, desperate, struggling to stay alive. "Someone out there," he muttered to himself. He leaned back in his chair. His heart beat slower, heavier. He knew the risks. He knew this could end badly. And yet, he sighed. His ship turned, changing course. The engines groaned as the heavy hauler shifted direction. The void swallowed him as he followed the trail of the signal. It grew stronger, pulsing faintly like the heartbeat of something barely alive. He pushed the throttle gently, steady but careful. His eyes scanned the stars, searching for any sign of danger. Minutes passed. Nothing. Just silence and darkness. Then, at last, he saw it, floating against the stars. Spinning slowly was a small escape pod. Surface was scorched, cracked in. Places the metal bent from some violent explosion. One side of it had been torn, leaving deep burns across its hull. The trucker's breath caught. A real pod? A real survivor. He scanned it quickly. Oxygen levels inside were critical. Power nearly gone. Whoever was inside had only minutes left, maybe less. He hesitated for only a second. Then his hand moved across the console, extending the hauler's grappling arm. The pod shook as the giant arm pulled it in toward the docking bay. The trucker rose from his seat, boots echoing against the metal floor. He walked to the docking chamber, his face calm, though his heart beat faster than he liked to admit. The pod hissed as the airlock sealed. With a press of a button, the door creaked open. Inside, slumped against the wall, was a young woman. Her eyes were half closed, lips pale, breathing shallow. She looked fragile, almost weightless in the dim light. The trucker moved fast. He pulled her gently out of the pod, carried her into the ship, and placed an oxygen mask over her face. She gasped, weak but alive, pulling in deep breaths like someone who had just escaped drowning. Her eyes opened slowly. For a moment, confusion filled them. Then fear. "Who are you?" she whispered. The trucker adjusted the oxygen flow. "Just a hauler. You're safe now." Her lips trembled. "Why? Why did you stop?" He looked at her quietly. "For a long time, He said nothing. Then his answer came. Simple, steady, because I could. The woman's eyes filled with tears, though she didn't yet understand why. In this endless, uncaring galaxy, ships often passed by distress calls. Help was rare. Mercy was rare. And yet this man, a stranger, had turned his heavy hauler off the quiet road of the stars to save her. The trucker said nothing more. He did not ask her name, her story, or her past. He only checked her vitals, set her up in the small med bunk, and returned to his pilot's chair. Outside, the stars stretched endless once more. The cargo ship moved forward again, carrying not only supplies this time, but also a fragile survivor whose story was yet to be told. The hook had been set. Because sometimes, in the cold silence of space, the smallest choice changes everything. Asterisk, the rescued the ship hummed softly, carrying the weight of silence again. The trucker sat in the pilot's chair, his eyes fixed on the stars. But his mind kept wandering back to the young woman resting in the med bunk. She had been barely alive when he pulled her from the escape pod. Now, she slept, her chest rising, and falling under the blanket he had placed over her. She was safe, for now. The trucker had seen many things in the galaxy: broken ships, burned stations, empty hulls drifting like ghosts. But it was rare to find a living soul out here. Rarer still to find someone worth saving. Most spacers would have turned away, thinking it too dangerous, too costly. Yet he had stopped. He had pulled her aboard without asking why, and that decision would change everything. Hours later, she woke again. Her eyes were clearer now, though still tired. She struggled to sit up, her hands shaking as she pulled the blanket closer. The trucker entered the small cabin with a metal cup in his hand. He placed it gently beside her. "Drink," he said simply. She looked at him carefully, as if trying to read his face. He was older, weathered by years of travel. His beard was rough, his eyes sharp yet quiet, like someone who had learned to carry too much without complaint. She sipped the water, her throat still dry. "Thank you," she whispered. The trucker gave a small nod. He pulled a chair and sat across from her. He did not rush her with questions. He simply waited, letting the silence settle between them. Finally, she spoke. "My name is Ilara," she said softly. The trucker leaned back, folding his arms. "What happened, Ilara?" Her eyes lowered. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, in a trembling voice, she told him. Her ship had been a small freighter, carrying food and medicine to a distant colony. Raiders had attacked without warning. They tore through the freighter like wolves through sheep. Her crew fought, but they were outnumbered. One by one, her friends were cut down until she was the only one left. "They destroyed everything," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I barely escaped. The pod was all I had. I thought I would die out, there, alone in the dark." The trucker listened quietly. He did not interrupt. He had heard stories like this before. Out in the deep, raiders hunted the weak. It was a truth everyone knew but few spoke of. Yet hearing it again, through her broken voice, stirred something inside him he had long buried. When she finished, she wiped her eyes and looked at him. "Why did you help me? You could have left me. Most would have." The trucker met her gaze, steady and calm. "Most would," he agreed. Then he shook his head. "But I'm not most." She stared at him, waiting for more, but he said nothing. Else the ship continued its journey, engines burning softly as it carried them toward the nearest station. Ilara spent much of her time in silence, recovering her strength. Sometimes she would watch the stars through the small porthole, whispering prayers for her lost crew. Other times she would study the man who had saved her. He spoke little. He worked the controls, checked the cargo, kept the ship running. But there was something about him, something unspoken. His silence was not cold, but heavy, as if it carried stories he would never tell. One evening, as the stars shifted outside, she walked into the cockpit and stood beside him. "I have nothing to give you," she said quietly. "No credits. No cargo. Not even a home to return to." The trucker kept his eyes on the stars. "I didn't ask for anything." Her brows furrowed. "Everyone asks for something. Not me." There was no pride in his voice, only truth. It puzzled her. In a galaxy built on trade, greed, and bargains, here was a man who wanted nothing. She did not know whether to feel grateful or unsettled. The days passed slowly, but danger in space never stayed far away. On the third night, the radar flashed again, this time not a distress signal, but a warning. A small ship was following them, keeping distance, but not hiding. The trucker's eyes narrowed. He knew the type. Raiders often tracked survivors, hoping to finish what they had started. He adjusted the hauler's course, weaving through a patch of asteroid debris. The engines groaned under the strain, but the old ship held steady. The shadow of the pursuer flickered, then vanished behind the rocks. For now, they were safe. Alara gripped the chair beside him, fear on her face. "They followed me." The trucker's jaw tightened. "They won't touch you here." She wanted to ask how he could be so sure, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It was not arrogance, it was certainty, born from a lifetime of surviving. That night, she could not sleep. She kept hearing his words echoing in her head. "I didn't ask for anything. Why not?" Who was this man who saved her life, asked for no payment, and faced danger without hesitation? And why, deep inside, did she feel his kindness carried a weight heavier than any price? As she lay awake, she realized something. She had been rescued. Not only from death in space, but from despair. His silence, his steady presence, his refusal to take anything, these things made her wonder if there was more to him than just a trucker. The thought filled her with both comfort and mystery. She closed her eyes at last, whispering a promise to herself. "I will find a way to thank him, even if he asks for nothing." The stranger's story. The days aboard the old cargo hauler passed slowly. Outside the portholes, the stars drifted by like scattered diamonds, cold and distant. Inside, the silence was broken only by the soft hum of the engines and the occasional clank of machinery as the trucker moved about his ship. Alara, the young woman he had rescued, was growing stronger. Her cheeks had color again. Her voice carried more strength. Yet, her eyes still carried the weight of sorrow, the kind of sorrow that came from seeing everything torn away in an instant. The trucker never pressed her with questions. He gave her food, water, and rest. He gave her space. But silence has a way of opening doors. And one evening, as the stars burned blue outside, she finally chose to speak. She sat across from him at the small metal table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of broth. For a long while, she stared into the steam, as if searching for courage. Then she lifted her eyes. "My ship was called the Aurora Dawn," she began quietly. The trucker said nothing, only listened. His eyes, sharp and steady, never left hers. "We weren't a military crew," she continued. "We were just traders. Food, medicine, supplies, nothing worth killing for. At least, that's what we thought." Her fingers tightened around the cup. But the raiders, they didn't care. They wanted what we carried, and when we had nothing left to give, they wanted our lives. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "They hit us fast. Engines disabled, hull breached. My captain tried to negotiate. They shot him where he stood. My crew fought back, but it was hopeless. They cut through us like fire through paper. I ran. I didn't want to, but they told me to. They forced me into the pod, sealed it, and launched me out. Into the dark, she paused, her eyes filling with tears. I heard their screams in the comms. I heard the ship break apart, and then silence. Just me, alone, spinning in the void. The trucker leaned back in his chair. His face gave nothing away, but inside, something stirred. He had seen death before. He had lost people too. And, though he said nothing, his silence told her he understood. Alara wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. When I saw your ship pull me in, I thought I was dreaming. Nobody stops for distress pods anymore. Everyone knows the risks, but you did. Why? The trucker met her gaze. His voice was low, steady, because I could. The same words as before. Simple, unmoving. But to Alara, they carried a weight far beyond their shape. She wanted to press him to ask more, but something about his quiet strength kept her from pushing. So instead, she whispered, "Then I owe you my life." The trucker shook his head. "You owe me nothing." And that was the end of it. At least, for him. But Alara's heart was not so simple. Each passing day, she found herself watching him more closely. He was a man built from scars. She could see that much. His hands were rough, his shoulders heavy, his face marked by years of travel. Yet there was no bitterness in him, no demand, no hunger for reward. He worked quietly, fixing parts of the ship, checking the cargo, charting the course. Always steady, always silent. At times, she caught him staring at a small locket he kept, tucked near the control panel. It was old, scratched, its screen flickering faintly when he tapped it. Once, she glimpsed what it showed, a picture of a little girl with bright eyes and a wide smile. But when he noticed her looking, he closed it quickly and said nothing. That silence spoke louder than words. Alara understood then. This trucker carried his own ghosts. One night, unable to sleep, she sat in the cockpit beside him. The ship drifted through a calm sector, stars gliding past in silence. She looked at him and said softly, "Do you ever wonder why we survive? Why some of us are left when others are taken?" The trucker didn't answer right away. His hands rested on the controls. Steady, as always. Finally, he said, "Survival isn't about why. It's about what comes after." Alara frowned. "What do you mean?" His eyes stayed on the stars. "You're alive. That means you have to decide what you'll do with it, what you'll carry forward. That's all survival is." His words struck her deeply. She thought of her crew, of the captain who had pushed her into the pod. She thought of their screams as the ship tore apart. She thought of her guilt for running for living when they did not, but his words made her see it differently. Maybe survival wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was responsibility. For the first time since her escape, Alara felt a small spark inside her. Not hope, not yet, but something close. She turned to him, her voice steadier than before. "Then maybe survival is also about gratitude. About remembering who gave you a chance to live." The trucker's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. But for a brief moment, his eyes softened, just slightly, before hardening again. Alara noticed. And she made herself a promise. "He says he wants nothing. He refuses every offer. But I will find a way to thank him. Somehow I will." That night, as she lay awake in her bunk, the hum of the engines lulling her, Alara thought of her journey. She had lost everything: her ship, her crew, her family in the stars. But she had gained one thing: a stranger who had chosen mercy when no one else would. And she knew his story was not finished, just as hers wasn't. The galaxy was wide, cruel, and cold. But sometimes, in the darkest places, a spark of humanity still remained. And that spark could change everything. **The silent kindness. The cargo hauler sailed through the void like a Lone Shadow carrying its simple load of steel, food packs, and one unexpected passenger. Days had turned into weeks, and still the trucker asked for nothing. He treated Alara with the same steady patience, every day no demands. No questions, no expectations. To Alara, this was strange. In her world, every kindness came with a price. A favor meant debt. A rescue meant repayment. Yet this man, this quiet truck, gave and gave without taking at first. She had thought it was indifference, that perhaps he simply did not care. But the more time she spent aboard his ship, the more she saw the truth. His silence was not coldness, but choice. He carried his own burdens, and perhaps in helping others, he found a way to bear them. One evening, as the ship drifted past the glowing curve of a dying star, Alara approached him in the cockpit. She carried something small in her hand's jewelry, a thin silver chain she had hidden since the raid. It was the last valuable she owned. She placed it on the console beside him. "Take this," she said softly. "It isn't much, but it's all I have. You saved my life. You deserve it." The trucker glanced at the chain, then at her. His expression did not change. Slowly, he shook his head. "I don't want it." Her eyes widened. "You don't understand. This was my mother's. It's the only thing I have left. I want you to have it." He turned his gaze back to the stars. "Keep it. You'll need it more than I will." The refusal stung her, not because he insulted her gift, but because he made her feel powerless. She wanted to repay him, to give meaning to his act of mercy. Yet he stripped that chance away with his quiet rejection. The days that followed were no different. She offered him food, help with repairs, even small chores around the ship. Each time he refused or gave only the smallest nod of acceptance. "I didn't rescue you for payment," he said once when she pressed too hard. "I don't need anything from you." But Alara could not let it rest. Gratitude burned inside her, sharp and restless. She could not understand how a man could want nothing. Everyone wanted something: wealth, power, companionship, even recognition. But him? Nothing. Or so he claimed. Late one night, Alara walked into the cockpit quietly, her footsteps soft against the metal floor. The trucker was there, as always, his eyes on the endless road of stars. But his hand was not on the controls, it rested on that small locket again. She stopped, watching silently. The faint glow of the screen flickered across his face, softening the lines of his tired features. Inside, she saw the image again, the little girl, smiling as if the universe was still kind. The trucker closed it quickly when he noticed her, slipping it back into his pocket. But in that brief moment, Alara understood. He did want something. He wanted something so deeply it haunted him. Something he could never have again. She said nothing, but her heart softened. His silence was not emptiness, was pain. The following morning, Alara tried again. She placed a stack of data credits on the table. They were worthless to her now, but valuable enough to buy repairs or supplies. "Please," she said, "at least take this. You risked your life. You deserve something." The trucker glanced at the credits, then at her. His voice was calm, steady, unshaken. "I don't risk my life for rewards. I do it because I can. That's all." His words were final. She lowered her head, frustrated but also strangely moved. It was later, while repairing one of the ship's auxiliary panels, that Alara finally confronted him. She crouched beside him, handing him tools as he worked. "You say you want nothing," she said quietly, "but that's not true." He raised an eyebrow, but kept working. "And what do you think I want?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Peace." For the first time, he stopped moving. The silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Then, slowly, he exhaled and tightened the last bolt. "Maybe," he said. Nothing more, but to Alara, that single word was a confession. From then on, she stopped trying to pay him with things. Instead, she tried to repay him with presents, with words, with stories, with moments of warmth. She told him about her childhood on a small colony world, about the songs her mother sang, about the first time she saw the stars from orbit. The trucker listened quietly, never adding much, but never turning her away either. Sometimes, she thought, she saw the ghost of a smile tug at the corner of his lips. She realized then, perhaps his kindness was not about refusing reward, but about giving people something they didn't even know they needed: safety, silence, a chance to breathe. And perhaps her gratitude would not be in gifts or credits, but in giving him something he had long lost: connection. Yet the galaxy does not leave kindness alone for long. One evening, as the ship drifted through a sector of abandoned satellites, the radar lit up again. A patrol of Raider scouts was sweeping the area, hungry for stragglers. The trucker adjusted course, pulling the hauler into the shadow of a dead station. Engine silent, lights dimmed. They drifted in the dark. Alara sat beside him, heart pounding. Will they find us? The trucker's voice was calm, steady, unshaken. Not if we stay quiet. Minutes crawled like hours. Outside, the Raiders moved past, their lights cutting across the void. Alara held her breath, gripping the armrest until her knuckles turned white. Finally, the ships moved on, fading into the distance. The trucker leaned back, as if it had been nothing at all. But Alara saw the truth. He had risked his life again, for her, without asking for anything in return. And she knew now her gratitude would not be a gift, but a promise. She would find a way to thank him, not because he wanted it, but because he deserved it. Asterisk, the gift of gratitude. The stars rolled past like a quiet river of fire, endless and eternal. The cargo hauler pushed through the dark, its old engine steady, carrying its cargo, its trucker, and its passenger toward the nearest station. Alara sat in the medbunk, staring at the ceiling. Her strength had returned, but her heart remained. Restless for days, she had tried to thank the man who had saved her life. For days, he had refused turning away jewelry, credits, even her offer to help with repairs. Each refusal was like a wall she could not climb. He said he wanted nothing. But Alara could feel the truth beneath his silence. No one truly wanted nothing. Everyone carried a hunger, even if it was not for money or gifts. And she was determined to find his. The quiet routine, the days settled into a rhythm. The trucker woke early, checked the cargo, ran diagnostics on the ship, and piloted through the stars. Alara helped where she could, though he never asked. She cleaned, prepared food, and sometimes sat with him in the cockpit, telling small stories from her past. He listened without interrupting, his face always calm. At times, she wondered if her words reached him at all. But every now and then, she caught the faintest flicker in his eyes. Memory stirred. A hidden emotion he kept locked away. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Alara noticed the locket again. He thought she was asleep, but she saw him in the dim glow of the cockpit, the small metal piece cradled in his rough hands. The screen flickered, showing the smiling face of the little girl. His thumb brushed across the image, slow and careful, like someone touching a wound that never healed. Then, with a deep sigh, he closed it and tucked it away. Alara turned in her bunk, her chest heavy. She understood then the greatest thing he had lost was not money, not glory, but someone he loved. The attempt at thanks the next morning. She tried again. "You saved me," she said, while they shared a meal. "And you won't let me repay you, but I must do something." The trucker shook his head. "You don't owe me." "That's not true," she pressed. "You risked everything for me. At least let me cook." Or he cut her off with a wave. of his hand. Gratitude is wasted if it weighs you down. Live, that's enough. Ilara fell silent. She wanted to argue, but the calm certainty in his voice silenced her. To him, saving her required no thanks. To him, it was simply the right thing to do. But in her heart, she knew. Gratitude is not wasted. Gratitude is life itself. The spark of an idealator that day, while exploring the hauler's storage compartments, Ilara stumbled upon a small box of broken personal items. Spare parts, old tools, scraps of metal, things the trucker had kept but never fixed. Among them lay the locket. Its hinge was cracked, its screen dull, the casing bent from years of wear. She lifted it gently, her heart thudding. She remembered the way his eyes softened whenever he looked at it. She remembered the silence that always followed in that moment. She knew, this was how I can thank him. The work begins. Ilara waited until the trucker was asleep in his cabin. She sat in the dim light of the maintenance bay, the locket spread out before her. With trembling hands, she pried open its casing, careful not to damage the delicate image inside. The little girl's face appeared again, frozen in time, smiling, alive in memory. Ilara swallowed hard. She could almost feel the weight of his sorrow pressing against her chest. Using scraps from the storage box, she began to repair the hinge, smoothing the bent metal until it shone again. She polished the casing, replaced the tiny screws, and rerouted the weak wiring. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the faint hum of the ship and the clink of her tools. She was no engineer, but desperation makes the hands steady. She needed to give him this asterisk. The moment of truth by dawn. The locket gleamed. The casing was straight, the screen brighter, the hinge strong again. It was not perfect, but it was whole. Ilara held it close to her chest, her heart racing. For the first time since her rescue, she felt she carried something worth giving. Not money, not favors, but something priceless, memory restored. When the trucker entered the cockpit later that morning, he found her waiting. She stood, nervous but determined, the locket in her hand. He froze. I know you don't want gifts, she began, her voice unsteady. I know you refuse payment, but this isn't payment. This isn't debt, it's gratitude. She stepped forward, placing the locket in his calloused palm. You saved my life. I cannot repay that. But I can give you back this. One can give you back what time tried to take. The breaking of silence, the trucker stared at the locket. Slowly, his thumb traced the smooth edges, the polished surface, the clean hinge. The screen flickered, and the little girl's smile shone brighter than before. For the first time in years, the locket worked as it once had. The trucker's breath hitched. His chest rose and fell, and for a moment, his silence broke not with words, but with a trembling in his hands. Ilara watched, her own eyes wet with tears. She whispered, sometimes gratitude is not about what you give, it's about what you remember. And I want you to remember her, not as broken, but whole. The trucker's eyes closed. A long silence filled the room, heavy with the weight of memory and pain. Finally, in a voice rough with emotion, he whispered two words he had not spoken in years. Thank you. The transformationalist's chest tightened. She had expected him to refuse again, to push her gesture aside. But instead, his wall of silence cracked. The man who had once seemed unshakable now stood vulnerable, human, alive, with sorrow and love. He clutched the locket tightly, as if holding it tanned the little girl within would keep her from fading. His eyes, once always fixed on the endless road, now glistened with something else. Memory and perhaps healing. Ilara stepped back, giving him space. She did not speak again. She did not need to. The gift had spoken for her. Anew quiet the ship, continued its journey, but the silence between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers or of walls built high. It was the silence of understanding. The silence of wounds shared in the quiet of the stars. Elara sat beside him in the cockpit, watching as he held the locket near the console. He did not hide it this time. He left it open, the girl's smile, lighting the dim room. For the first time, she saw the corners of his lips turn upward, faint but real. The trucker said little, as always. But when he looked at Elara, his eyes carried something new. Not debt, not distance, but gratitude, closing. Of part 5 in that moment, Elara realized something profound. Gratitude is not a trade. It is not coins exchanged or favors returned. Gratitude is giving life back where it was lost, light back where it has faded. And in her gift, she had done what no credits or treasures could. She had touched the heart of a man who had asked for nothing, but in giving him back a piece of his past, she had also given him something more, a reason to keep moving forward. Asterisk the emotional turn, the locket glowed softly in the dim light of the cockpit, its screen bright and alive again. The smiling face of the little girl seemed to light up more than the room. It lit something inside the trucker that had long been buried in silence. For years, it carried that broken piece of metal like a wound, a reminder of what he had lost, a punishment he forced himself to carry day after day, mile after mile across the stars. Now, for the first time, it was whole again, and with it, part of him cracked open. The cracks in the armor. Elara sat quietly across from him, her hands folded in her lap. She had said nothing more after giving him the locket. She did not need to. The silence between them was thick with meaning. The trucker stared at the screen for a long time, his thumb brushing gently across the girl's frozen smile. His face was still hard, his eyes still sharp, but they were wet now. Shining in the glow, he closed his fist around the locket, then set it gently on the console beside him. His voice, when it finally came, was low and rough, as if pulled from deep within, a chest unused to speaking. Her name was Lyra. Elara lifted her eyes, surprised. Until now, he had never offered anything about himself. Never a detail, never a word. But now the wall was cracking. She was my daughter. The story of loss. The trucker's voice carried a weight that filled the room. His words were slow, careful, as if each one was a stone he had to lift before placing it in the open. We lived on a small colony world, he began. It wasn't much dust, heat, broken machinery, but it was ours. My wife, my daughter, me. Lyra loved the stars. Said she wanted to ride them someday, said she'd be a captain, even though she was just a little girl with skinned knees and tangled hair. He paused, his eyes far away. Then the raiders came, same as yours. They wanted what we had, food, fuel, water. We gave them everything, but they didn't care. They wanted more. They wanted to make an example of us. His hands clenched. The knuckles went white. They burned the settlement. My wife didn't make it. Lyra. His voice faltered, breaking. For the first time, he swallowed hard, forcing the words out. Lyra was caught in the fire. I couldn't reach her. I tried, I swear I tried, but the flames. He stopped, staring at the locket. His body trembled, his jaw tight, as if he were fighting to hold back years of grief. Elara's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, but she did not. She understood his pain was sacred. His grief belonged to him. And all she could offer was presence. The silence of survival. For a long moment, he said nothing more. The only sound was the steady hum of the ship. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter than before. After that, I left. I couldn't stay. Every corner of that world was ash and memory. I bought this ship, took jobs, ran cargo, kept moving. Always moving. If I stopped, I'd remember. If I remembered, I'd break. He looked at Alara, then his eyes sharp, almost accusing. That's why I ask for nothing, because nothing I'm given can bring her back. No money, no reward, no gift, nothing. Alara met his gaze without flinching. Her voice was soft but steady. And yet you saved me. His eyes flickered. Because I could. No, she said firmly. Because you still care. Because you're still human. He looked away, but her words struck him like a blade. He had spent years pretending he was stone, unmoved, empty. But the truth was in front of him now. He was not empty. He was full of pain, yes, but also of something else, something he had tried to bury. The weight of gratitude. Ella leaned closer, her voice gentle. You think wanting nothing protects? You, but it doesn't. It just locks the pain inside. Gratitude isn't about reward. It's about reminding you that you still matter. The trucker's eyes closed, his face tense. For a moment, Alara feared she had gone too far. But then, his lips parted, and he whispered again, almost too soft to hear. Thank you. 2 words, but they carried the weight of years. Tears slid down his face, silent but unstoppable. He didn't hide them this time. He didn't close himself off. For the first time since his daughter's death, he allowed himself to grieve not. In silence, not in hiding, but openly, before another soul. Alara's own tears fell. Not for herself, but for him. For the man who had carried so much alone. For the father who had lost everything, yet still found it in him to save a stranger. The new bond from that moment, something changed between them. The air was different, lighter. The silence that followed was no longer heavy with distance, but filled with quiet understanding. The trucker did not speak often, but when he did, his words carried more warmth. He told her small things about Lyra, the way she laughed, the way she sang, the way she once drew stars on the walls of their home. Alara listened to every detail, holding them close like treasures. And in return, she shared more of herself, stories of her childhood, of the family she had lost in the raid, of the small dreams she once carried. It was not a trade. It was a bond. 2 souls carrying different sorrows, finding comfort in the simple act of sharing them. The test of danger, but the galaxy never left such moments alone for long. A week later, the hauler crossed into a sector known for pirate activity. The radar picked up movement again, multiple ships, fast and aggressive. Closing in, the trucker's hands moved swiftly across the controls. His eyes sharpened, the tears of before, now replaced by the steel of survival. They've found us. He muttered. Elar ungripped the chair beside him. The same raiders? Maybe. Doesn't matter. They want what we have, and they'll take it if we let them. The hauler was strong, but slow. Against raiders, they had little chance in open combat. The trucker pulled hard on the controls, weaving the ship through a field of asteroid fragments. Rocks spun past, scraping the hull, but offering cover. The raiders followed, their engines burning bright in pursuit. Elier's heart pounded. What do we do? The trucker's jaw tightened. We survive. The choice of humanity. The chase dragged on, the hauler groaning as it pushed its limits. A stray shot from the raiders clipped their rear, sending alarms blaring. The trucker gritted his teeth, forcing the ship through tighter gaps, risking everything to keep them alive. Finally, they broke free, slipping behind a massive asteroid that blocked the raiders' sensors. The hauler floated in silence, hidden in the shadow. Ilara's chest heaved with relief. She turned to him. You saved me again. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the locket, still glowing faintly on the console. Slowly, he touched it, his fingers steady. "I used to think saving someone was meaningless," he said softly, "because no matter how many I saved, it would never bring her back. But maybe," he paused, his voice thick with emotion, "maybe saving you means she didn't die for nothing. Maybe I can still give something to the stars." Alara's eyes blurred with tears. She reached out, laying her hand gently over his. "She lives in you, and through you, she saved me." The true gratitude. The trucker looked at her, then not with the cold distance of before, but with eyes full of something new. Not emptiness, not only grief, but purpose. He whispered once more, but this time it was not broken. It was strong, steady, and filled with truth. "Thank you, Alara, for giving me back what I thought I lost." Alara squeezed his hand, smiling through her tears. "No, thank you for showing me that even in the darkest places, kindness still exists." The two of them sat in silence, but it was no longer the silence of sorrow. It was the silence of two souls bound by gratitude, by pain, by humanity. And in that silence, the trucker felt something he had not felt in years: hope. The ending asterisk. The galaxy stretched wide, endless as ever. The stars shone like distant lanterns, silent witnesses to countless lives and countless stories. And among them drifted the old cargo hauler, its engines humming softly as it carried its passengers toward the nearest station. Inside, the silence was no longer heavy. It was calm. It was shared. The trucker sat in the cockpit, one hand resting on the controls, the other gently holding the locket that now gleamed whole again. Beside him sat Alara, quiet but not afraid, her eyes on the horizon of stars. They did not speak often, but words were no longer needed. Something had changed. Something had been mended, not just the locket, but the heart of a man who had long believed nothing could heal him. The arrival at the station days later. The station appeared in the distance, a massive ring of steel and light orbiting a barren moon. It was no paradise, but it was safety. Ships drifted in and out like insects buzzing around a hive. Alara leaned forward in her seat, her heart tightening. This was where her journey with the trucker would end. The hauler glided into the docking bay, groaning as it latched onto the port. The engines powered down, and the hum that had become her constant comfort faded into silence. For the first time since her rescue, Alara realized how much she had come to depend on that sound, the sound of survival, of safety, of his ship. The trucker stood, adjusting his worn jacket. His face was calm, unreadable again, but his eyes betrayed a softness that had not been there before. "This is where you get off," he said simply. Alara rose slowly, her chest tight. She wanted to thank him again, to say 1,000 words that burned inside her, but her throat felt heavy. Instead, she followed him down the narrow hall toward the docking hatch. The attempt at goodbye, the hatch hissed open, revealing the stations. Bright corridors beyond. People moved about, shouting, carrying crates, exchanging credits. Life, noisy and restless, rushed around them. Alara turned to him. "What will you do now?" He shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Same as always, cargo to deliver. Roads to travel." Her eyes stung. "And then, will I ever see you again?" The trucker's gaze lingered on her. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then he said, "Maybe. The stars are wide. But sometimes paths cross again." She bit her lip, fighting the ache in her chest. She wanted to beg him to stay, to ask him not to leave her behind. But she knew better. He was a man of the road. He belonged to the silence between the stars. So instead, she stepped forward and did what she could. She hugged him. At first, he stiffened, unused to such closeness. But then, slowly, his arms came around her, strong and steady. For a moment, she felt not only his strength, but his sorrow, his hope, his humanity. When they pulled apart, her eyes were wet. "You say you want nothing, but you've given me everything. I won't forget." He nodded, his jaw tight, his hand resting lightly on the locket. "And I won't forget you." The last gift Alara turned to leave, but then paused. She dug into her pocket and pulled out the silver chain she had once tried to give him. She pressed it into his hand. "This isn't payment," she said firmly. "It's a reminder, not of debt, but of gratitude." The trucker stared at it for a long moment. This time, he did not refuse. He closed his fist around it, his eyes meeting hers. "Then I'll carry it," he said softly. "For you." Ilara smiled through her tears. She wanted to say more, but her words failed. So she simply nodded, turned, and stepped into the crowd. The road resumes. The trucker watched her until she disappeared among the station's people. Then he turned and walked back into his ship. The hatch sealed shut, the engines roared to life, and once more the old hauler drifted from the dock into the sea of stars. But something was different now. The silence inside the cockpit was no longer empty. The locket rested on the console, its screen glowing faintly with Lyra's smile. Beside it lay the silver chain, shining in the dim light. To remind her one of what he had lost and one of what he had found. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes on the horizon. For the first time in years, his chest felt lighter. The road ahead was still long, still lonely. But it no longer felt hopeless, because gratitude had given him something he thought impossible: purpose. Alara's new path. Meanwhile, Alara stood on the station balcony, watching the hauler shrink into the distance. Her heart ached, but not with despair, with resolve. She had been given life when she expected only death. She had been shown kindness when she expected nothing. And now she carried a promise inside her heart. She would live in a way that honored him. "Because I could," he had said. And she whispered into the stars, "Because you did." The lasting impact. The galaxy was still cruel. Raiders still hunted. Wars still raged. People still suffered. But for two souls, one trucker haunted by loss, and one survivor pulled from the void, the universe had changed. Not because of wealth, not because of power, but because of kindness freely given and gratitude honestly returned. The trucker had asked for nothing. Yet in the end, he had received everything: the chance to heal, the strength to move forward, and the knowledge that, even in the darkest corners of the stars, humanity still mattered. And Alara, who once thought herself lost, had found a truth worth carrying forever. Sometimes, the smallest act of thanks can change the heaviest of hearts. Narrators closing. For your YouTube audience, the galaxy is vast, cold, and unforgiving. But stories like these remind us that being human is not about power or wealth or conquest. It is about compassion. It is about kindness, and it is about gratitude. The trucker wanted nothing, yet received everything. Alara had nothing, yet gave the greatest gift. This is the heart of HFY, humanity against all odds, proving that even the smallest act can echo through the stars forever.